Welcome to everyone to this session on how to become a better reader, organized by English Department and Literary Club of Government Arts and Science College, Kulathoor. So once again, I welcome everybody, especially Ashwati and all our participants today, and our guest speaker, Mr. Chad Haag, who's a writer and philosopher, who has graciously accepted our invitation and come here to talk to you for about an hour. No, we won't go till that long. But anyway, let's start our session. So, as you all know, we are organizing this session in association with in relation with the reading week. വായനാ വാരത്തോടനുബന്ധിച്ചാണ് നമ്മൾ ഈ ഒരു സെഷൻ ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റും ലിറ്റററി ക്ലബും ഓർഗനൈസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. വായനയുടെ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻസിനെ പറ്റി നിങ്ങൾ ഒരുപാട് ഇതിനോടകം ചർച്ച ചെയ്ത് കഴിഞ്ഞു. പക്ഷെ നമ്മൾ അധികം പറഞ്ഞ് കേൾക്കാത്തൊരു കാര്യമാണ് നമ്മളുടെ റീഡിംഗ് പാറ്റേൺസ് എത്രത്തോളം നല്ലതാണെന്ന് നമുക്ക് അറിയില്ല. സോ വി ഹാവ് ടു ബി സെൽഫ് അവെയർ ഓഫ് ഹൗ ഗുഡ് എ റീഡർ യു ആർ ആൻഡ് ഹൗ യു ക്യാൻ ഇംപ്രൂവ് യുവർ സെൽഫ് ഇൻ ദ സ്കെയിൽ ഓഫ് ബിക്കമിങ് എ ബെറ്റർ reader. So that is why sir is here to help you today. He'll be sharing his experiences and some useful tips and some useful techniques you can include in your reading methods in your day-to-day life on your journey to become a better reader. So I welcome sir to speak to you. So after he speaks to you for a bit, we will be sharing a presentation. So I welcome sir to speak to you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to begin by thanking ma'am, as well as Principal Anil Sir, the Literary Club and Department of English at Kulathoor Government Arts and Sciences College for the opportunity to spend this morning with you discussing how to become a better reader. Now, we do have a slideshow. Do you want to go ahead and start that?
Yeah, okay. So now we'll be loading the slideshow. Okay. All right. So I hope you can see the screen now. All righty. Okay. You go ahead and present.
And so today we will be discussing how to become a more efficient reader, and specifically how to eventually be able to read one book every day. Now, that might sound unbelievable, but there are many readers within the world who do exactly that. They read potentially 365 books a year. Okay, and they do so by implementing the methods I'm going to show you within this video itself. Now, the number 365, once again, might sound a little bit outrageous, but it's already been proven that the average person spends as much time on social media as could be devoted to reading some 200 books per year. And that is without even implementing the methods I'm going to show you here. So with those included, this is definitely a realistic figure, something which I myself have done many times within my life, finish a book in a day. And that is while you're doing other things, of course. You're working a job, okay? You're reading here and there and doing all of your responsibilities for that day, but still able to do so. Now, in order to find out how that is possible, we first need to discuss what exactly the reading methodologies most people use that are holding them back from doing that might be. And for that, we really need to talk about what happens from, say, kindergarten to third grade, as it is called in the United States of America. Now, I'm not as sure how literacy is taught to young children here in India, but in my home nation of America, we basically stopped teaching reading at the age of, say, 8 years old, even to the extent that the U.S. government uses the percentage of children who have failed to learn literacy by the age of 8 and projects how many prisons they need to construct on the basis of that figure. The assumption is if you haven't learned to read by third grade, you're basically going to end up, a certain percentage of them are going to end up in prison because the idea is, well, they missed their chance, okay, because we don't teach literacy beyond that point. But the question is, what exactly do you learn within those first 3 years, and is it really enough? Well, in the United States, what you learn in, say, kindergarten to third grade is largely how to associate particular letters with particular sounds, okay? And when I was, say, 5 years old, all the way back in like 1994, in America, we had a book where a different image was associated with a different letter. So the letter N was associated with an airplane because an airplane goes something like that, So the child learns to recall that image. And if you watch little kids try to read out loud, they'll often sound out one letter at a time. So they'll say, in, sound, one at a time. And that's okay, to get you started. But there is so much more to reading than just that, and we would do well to keep learning literacy even well into adulthood. So one thing I would emphasize is that the competent reader, as opposed to one who is simply beginning, doesn't so much sound out letters as they are able to recognize entire shapes. And this is something which can be proven by the way that if you look to about the the fourth and fifth lines on this slide, you'll notice that there's something of a challenge here. Okay, there's something of a message here with a certain barrier over it. But the question is, can you still recognize the meaning of this message even with that barrier? So I don't know if it's possible to ask for a response.
I think that will just make things a little slower. So I can be your interactive person.
Okay.
So you can ask me questions.
Yes, ma'am. So we have a challenge here. Are you able to?
Okay.
Okay. I am 1 minute.
Okay. I am able to read this line. So the line in which the cursor is now, can you read this line even with the middle section of it missing? How about this one? You can read it too, can't you?
So this is quite interesting because the way that we teach literacy assumes that you simply associate one letter with one sound, but here the letter is actually distorted. And you can only see part of it, but the same goes for this challenge below it. Here we have a set of other things with an obstruction over them, but can you guess, ma'am, what shape each of these is?
So this is a triangle. This is a rectangle. This is like, I'm bad with shapes, so what is this? Is like
in America,
pentagon.
Yeah, in America we call it pentagon.
Pentagon. Okay. This is a circle, and this is a star. Okay.
That's very good. And this is something which once again shows that when you are processing this information, you're doing something more than just what we assume when you're 5 years old. You have the ability to actually restore the missing parts of that shape. And this is because you have a certain familiarity with the big picture. Okay.
Okay. So even though the shape is not whole, like some parts are missing, I am still able to guess what shape this is.
Yes, and you're able to do something even more impressive than that. You're able to do this for much broader structures as well, as we'll discuss over the course of this. Okay. You can do this with a whole book. Okay, we'll explain this in greater detail in just a moment, but really when you're reading, you're not just processing one sound at a time. Really reading is being able to project ahead what you think the message of the entire book might be, okay? And the fun of reading is wondering how that whole is going to look. And one of the most exciting parts is having those expectations either confirmed or having them adjusted. So if you're reading, say, Harry Potter, okay, to use a very basic example, which you guys will be studying soon anyway, right?
Yes.
Right. You might be wondering at the beginning of the book, oh, this is such an unfortunate situation the young boy is in. Is he going to have an escape? Right? Is he going to be basically a prisoner in this Muggle household forever, or is he going to find some way to escape? Right? And that is basically, that expectation is confirmed when he gets to Hogwarts, right? But then you wonder, like, is he going to be accepted any better there, or is he going to have challenges there? And that's what keeps the book exciting. So in literary theory, we call this the hermeneutic circle, okay? The idea that you only understand a part of the book if you have this constantly changing idea of what the whole is, okay? And this is, yeah, so, but at the level of reading individual contents, we also can find this at work even in our ability to grasp entire groups of words, okay, rather than recognizing the shape of only one. We call these idiomatic groups, such as phrases good as gold, all in a day's work, what goes around comes around. These are phrases which people repeatedly use. They're not really like one person's invention. They're just, and you probably have these in Malayalam also, right, dear?
Yeah, there are many idioms in Malayalam too. Like I can think of some, but not many are coming into your Valanya Mookil Pidikka. That is one idiom in Malayalam. We have a lot of sayings like that in Malayalam. Anyway. So yeah, so what you are saying is instead of reading one letter at a time, like one sound at a time, you can just read groups of words together, right?
Right, and that is exactly what we don't teach children to do the way we teach literacy in the United States. But this is really what your brain self is kind of hardwired to do. And we can find this in the following example. The challenge on this slide is we actually have the same text in both cases. But everybody listening now should try the challenge of reading. Now you don't have to read the whole thing. Okay. Just read some of the top version of it, and then try to read some of the bottom, and you tell me which one is easier to read.
Okay, so I'll just tell that to my students now. നിങ്ങളുടെ മുമ്പിലിരിക്കുന്ന സ്ലൈഡിൽ തന്നിട്ടുള്ളത് രണ്ടും ഒരേ പാസേജ് ആണ്. ഈ മുകളിലുള്ളത് ഒരേ പാസേജ് ആണ്. അതേ പാസേജ് തന്നെയാണ് താഴെ തന്നിരിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ ഇതിൽ ഏതാണ് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് വായിക്കാൻ എളുപ്പമുള്ളത്? ഈ ഒരു ബ്ലോക്കിൽ കാണുന്നതാണോ അതോ താഴെ ഇങ്ങനെ കോളംസ് ആയിട്ട് കാണുന്നതാണോ? ഏതാണ് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് വായിക്കാൻ എളുപ്പം? Just try reading both and respond in the chat box. Chat box il just ഒന്ന് റെസ്പോണ്ട് ചെയ്യുക. ആദ്യത്തെ മുകളിലത്തെയാണോ താഴത്തെയാണോ വായിക്കാൻ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് കൂടുതൽ പറ്റുന്നത് എന്ന് നിങ്ങൾ ജസ്റ്റ് ഒന്ന് നോക്കുക. Okay. Can somebody respond? Columns. Okay, Ashmi and Angel, Anjali, they are all saying that columns are better. The second one is better to read.
Okay, so why might the second version be easier? It's the same text in either case.
So why is it? It must be the way it is arranged, right? When it is put together like this in long lines and all, you lose interest. Basically, it's all cluttered here. It looks like, it's not very tidy. So I don't feel like reading the first one. Second one, short lines. So psychologically, I feel like, okay, I can just read this very quickly and get it over with. Is that why?
Exactly. So you're talking about long and short. Well, we can actually put a number on that. How many words roughly? Now, obviously, some words are longer than others, but roughly, how many words do you see on the lines in the columns version?
Average. Four is the average. 4 or 5.
4 or 5, right? Yeah. And how many words do you have on one line on the top version?
It's more than 10, I think.
Right. I actually counted. It's 20.
20 words per line.
Yeah, you can count the words on the top line, for example. It's about 20. Okay. And this makes sense because how many columns do we have in the same space?
These are 4 columns are there.
Okay, so 4 times 5.
20.
Right. So it's taking in 20 words with your eyes versus taking in 5. And you'll notice that the groups of 5, you can basically take them in at once. But the group of 20, you really feel like you have to start all the way at the beginning and then move one sound, word, whatever at a time from left to right. And it's a very tiring and frustrating process. Right?
Eyes will also get too strained when you're trying to read something like that.
Right. It's actually it's defeating the purpose of reading, because reading is supposed to be fun, right? And it'll actually distract you from the message. Like, it's all, even though it's the same text, okay, it's easier to understand what is being talked about in the second form than the first, right?
All right. Okay.
So the a tendency to be able to process 5 words rather than say more than that, or even I would argue less than that. 5 is kind of the best number for your brain. This is something which a certain type of publication uses all the time. And we see on the screen, what kind of text is this we see on the screen? Like, what type of publication is that?
That's a newspaper, right?
Right. So you may have noticed that newspapers could print 20 words to a single line, but they don't do that. Instead, they break it up into many different smaller columns, right?
Yeah.
So they do that because they realize that they're dealing with a general audience. Many of these people are maybe not extremely passionate about reading, but they still want to be able to get their news, so they make it easier for them, right? Because they're running a business. They want to have the maximum number of readers and customers, okay? So an advantage we don't talk about, though, is if you have it broken up in columns of 5, you're not only able to do the sort of horizontal reading I mentioned on the last one, where if it's on 20, you have no choice except one from left to right, one unit at a time. If it's broken up like this, you can actually have vertical reading, okay? And a very simple example of this is you can look at the 5 lines I have within this slide, and you can kind of scan them vertically rather than working only one at a time. You can kind of glance and see like a basic idea of all 5 units right there.
Okay, so even if I don't read the whole thing listed here, I can just quickly run my eyes through the whole thing vertically rather than horizontally. So that's a good technique of reading.
Right, and that's why speed reading is something which, under ideal conditions, you could practice it to the point that you're able to read a whole book in one day.
Okay.
Like my own experience, for example, I've read, say, 400 pages in a day, etc. So with these techniques, you are able to process so much more information. However, you're not losing anything in the process. One of the myths of speed reading is the idea that, well, you're not really reading. You're simply taking in one word here and there, and then you're sort of guessing what lies in between. This is probably something you've heard before too, right, ma'am?
Yes.
Right. So, like, I've heard some people claim, oh, speed reading is just reading the first few words of a paragraph and then skipping the rest of the paragraph. That is not true. You're actually able to take in the whole paragraph with vertical reading, but you're able to get, ironically enough, a better understanding of all of that information. And the reason for this is, rather than take in isolated words one at a time, you're getting the full context. And the benefit of this is that if you're only taking in one word at a time, what happens if you run into a word you don't know?
I don't know.
You get stuck.
Yeah.
Right. So keep in mind that the average American only knows 500 to 2,000 words. Okay. There are, of course, hundreds of thousands of words in the English language, but the average American doesn't know that many of them.
So what do you think? Do you think like Indian readers or Indian learners of English know more words than native speakers of English, like Americans?
I can tell you that my experience when I was in college in America was that sometimes a student would come from another country, like, say, South Korea or Japan, and they would have a very erudite vocabulary. Right. So somebody was late, and one woman from South Korea, like, professor's late, she's like, oh, she's not very punctual. Well, that's a kind of a big word, you know. So an American would just say, oh, they're late. But she said they're very punctual because they formally learn all this vocabulary, right?
Okay. All right.
So what happens is, if you're just processing isolated words, if you don't know a word, you get stuck, okay, and then you just give up, right? But if you're scanning groups of words, you get the full context. So oftentimes, if there's a very technical word, like, say, phenomenology, oftentimes there will be a broader context explaining what that is. So oftentimes they'll say phenomenology or the philosophical study of experience. Well, now I'm not stuck on that word because I looked further ahead and I was told what it means. Okay, this is why you ironically get better comprehension. Okay, but there's another reason why you get better comprehension. This is rather than taking one word at a time, you're able to scan with your eyes and see entire structures. Okay, so an example of structure is if a writer is trying to make a point and they want to convince you of it, give some proof, what will they give you?
Examples.
Right. Right. They'll give you some examples. So they'll say, yeah, there was a case of a person who was learning English in South Korea, and they came to my college and they used the word punctual instead of late. I was just doing this, wasn't I? I was giving you examples. Okay, but if you are able to scan for the structure, you'll realize, oh, this is just an example, which is confirming what I just read. It's, in a certain sense, less important than what I just read. You can deal with it rather than getting stuck on it, okay? You can even sort of skim it. It's like, oh, he's giving me 3 different examples. There was a woman from South Korea, a man from Japan, a person from India, blah, 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 right? It's like,
So
okay,
instead of reading the whole thing, you can guess the structure by just reading the first example. So you can just, if you're a seasoned reader, you can guess that, so this is going to be repeated, and you can skim to the next part that is important.
Right. It's almost optional at that point. If you really want all that extra information, you can, but otherwise it's like, he's just exemplifying what he mentioned. I can move beyond that, or at least just look over it very quickly.
Okay.
Right, and even more so than this, you have lists. So an example of this is you might have a list of all of the great philosophers of ancient Greece. You have Aristotle, Plato, Thales, Protagoras, Heraclitus. It's a long list, okay? You don't need to read every single name, okay? You can just sort of go over that list if it's like 10, 15 names. And rather than getting stuck on, oh, I have never heard of Protagoras before, who's that, right?
Yeah, just like when we read Bible, you have some passages in which some really difficult names are mentioned. So you don't have to read all that. It's not that important.
Right, it's like an episode of The Simpsons where Homer Simpson finds out he's going to die in the morning, supposedly. So he says, okay, I'm finally going to read the Bible. And he's reading the chapters-long genealogy. So-and-so begat so-and-so, so-and-so begat so-and-so, and he falls asleep.
Yeah.
Right, he should have just skimmed that. So another thing, real quick, is you have quotes. So sometimes if you want to cite some information that was not made by you, like from an expert, to prove, well, experts also say this, you provide a quote. Sometimes these quotes are very long. You might have block quotes that last, like, I've seen, like, multiple pages. Like, there was a book about Moby Dick, which it literally cited an entire chapter of Moby Dick. Okay, it was a short chapter, but it still like copied and pasted a whole chapter, which is a little excessive. Well, if you realize it's just a quote to confirm an external source, you don't have to necessarily read every single word of it. Okay.
All right. So if you are a seasoned reader, you can just skip the whole quotation part and move to the next important part.
Right. I actually had multiple professors in college who said that if they encounter long quotes, even within an academic journal, they don't read it. Okay. This is basically optional. Okay. So here's a challenge, and if the students could maybe give any ideas within the chat box, let's think about any other structures found in reading.
Any other structures found in reading? So can you actually think of any other structures found in reading, like examples, lists, quotations? So you just think about it and put it in the chat box if you can find any. We will move to the next slide.
So here's some examples, really, of structures within writing, okay? And this comes down to not just a smaller structure within the text, but the structure of the whole text, okay? And this actually does differ quite a bit from one type of text to another. We talked a few slides ago about a newspaper article. Well, ma'am, what is the structure of a newspaper article?
So in a newspaper article, I guess the most important things are arranged at the top. So if you're in a hurry, you can just read the first paragraph and then leave it at that.
So what do you find at the end of a newspaper article?
Like unimportant things, like probably quotations and all. anecdotes or something like
Right,
that.
interviews, oftentimes.
Interviews,
If they really want to provide extra information for the person who's very interested, they'll interview an expert. Like if it's about the virus, they'll interview a doctor, or if it's about something financial, they'll interview a financial expert, etc. But most people are not going to stick around for all that. So the most important thing is at the beginning. Well, what about the structure of a joke?
I guess in the joke, the punchline is at the it's the final part of it. So in order to get a complete joke, you will have to read the whole thing.
Right, so it's the exact opposite of a newspaper article, right?
Yeah. Okay, and then
So, okay, but then you have a dialogue, okay? And what is a dialogue?
dialogue is an exchange between two or more people.
Right, it's two people talking to each other. Okay, so the structure of a dialogue is more tricky because what's the point of a dialogue?
It's just an exchange, right?
Right, but there's also a purpose, and oftentimes the purpose is for one person to convince the other. It's kind of like a debate. Okay, so in a certain sense, this is kind of trickier because what you're looking for is which one of these is going to convince the other that they're right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's quite different. So then we have a college essay. So I'll ask, ma'am, how is a college essay structured, at least in India?
I'm not a good authority on that, but I'd say there will be an introduction part, and then there will be a core part, and which leads to the conclusion, something like that.
Right. So when I was teaching college in America, I would teach the college essay. That was the whole course that I taught. And the way that you're supposed to teach it in America is you have an introduction in which you put forth a hypothesis, and then you're supposed to have 3 paragraphs exemplifying that hypothesis in 3 different ways. And then you have a conclusion that basically restates the hypothesis with something new. Okay. And the problem is that the other genres of writing are very different from that. Right, so we'll skip the philosophical treatise for now.
Yeah.
Just the story. What about a story?
Story also, it depends on what kind of story you are telling. Like if you're telling an adventure story, there will be kind of like an exposition, and you tell them.
Okay, so a story really has as beginning, middle, and end.
Yes.
So the beginning introduces a problem. The middle is them trying to solve the problem, and then the end is when you actually have the problem solved. So, just a show of hands, how many people have watched Lord of the Rings or read the book? Now, that's something which, like, every single person in America has watched the movie. Most people have read the book too. So, is this kind of a familiar story in India too?
I don't really know about that. How many of our listeners have read the books or watched the movies? But I think with me, Harry Potter is more popular than Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it sounds.
Yes, Ankit, Lord of the Rings. Have you watched it or read it?
Me.
No, Ankit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right. Okay, so yeah, I suppose 30 minutes. Okay, Ankit has watched a little bit.
Okay, right. So yeah, the Lord of the Rings.
Ankit found it boring.
Yeah, it's like a 9-hour. It's 3 different movies which are each 3 hours long. But yeah, in America, everybody has seen Lord of the Rings, so it's kind of a sort of a universal story to explain this. But suffice it to say that you can actually break down Lord of the Rings into 12 different stages, and these are ones which at least some people claim you can find in pretty much any story. We can do this with Harry Potter too,
Yeah,
right?
I think that switching to Harry Potter might be a better idea because more people are familiar with that here.
Okay, then I'll let you and the students explain this with Harry Potter because I've only read the first 2 books.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's discuss the stages.
So first we have the ordinary world, which is basically the world before the adventure actually begins. So in Lord of the Rings, they're living in the Shire. There's no war. There's no trouble. It's just daily life. For Harry Potter, the ordinary world at the beginning is what?
Harry is living with his uncle, aunt, and cousin. Very dreary life, bored.
Right, he's not very happy. And then,
Yeah.
but however, one day that changes. He finds a a thing has come up which makes him get out of that.
Yeah.
And what is it?
An excitement happens in his life when he gets a letter, a strange letter, inviting him to join a school of witchcraft and wizardry.
Right, so this is called the call to adventure. The adventure is going to Hogwarts, and this is when he literally gets the call to come, right? So is he totally ready to go at the beginning?
I guess with Harry, his specific circumstances actually make him want to leave his uncle and aunt. But unfortunately, his uncle and aunt are against him going to a magic school. So initially, there is some kind of tension. So he is also not completely convinced and he can't go either.
Right. So yeah, I mean, in some cases, the call is refused by the hero. Other times, maybe it's not like that, but there's still some sort of roadblock where it's not easy. And oftentimes, this is resolved by meeting with the mentor. So in Lord of the Rings, the mentor, the teacher, is the wizard Gandalf. Who's the mentor in Harry Potter?
If you think about the whole picture, Dumbledore is the mentor, but the mentor he meets at first is Hagrid.
Yeah.
He gets glimpses into the magical world through Hagrid.
Right, so he's not doing it totally on his own. Like he has help from older people with more knowledge, more skills in magic, and they give him a hand to become a better wizard himself. Right. So then, after he gets help from the mentor, he crosses the first threshold, and this is when the journey begins.
Oh yeah, this step is literally what happens in Harry Potter in the first book anyway. He crosses the threshold between the human world and the magical world by crossing through a wall.
Right, it's like
in the railway station.
Right, it's like an invisible wall which no one else can see. But he ends up on a train to Hogwarts that way.
Yes. Platform number 9 3/4.
Right. So this is when the journey begins. Okay, and along the way you have, what are these?
Tests, allies, enemies.
So for Harry Potter, what are the tests?
Ankit can answer that. He is a fan of Harry Potter. Me too, actually. So a lot of tests are seen. Adjusting into the magical world itself.
Right,
he had anxiety. Ankit says.
Yeah, so that's great. So he had anxiety about, with competition with that guy. I forgot his name. The guy from Slytherin, the blonde
Draco
boy.
Malfoy.
Right, and what are they competing at specifically?
They are competing for popularity, attention, Quidditch.
Right, sports. So
Yeah.
the right, the minor one of the minor tests is he wants to win the game. Right? So that's a test. And along the way, he meets, well, we've already mentioned one enemy who is the blonde guy from Slytherin.
Draco Malfoy. Yeah.
Right, he's got some other enemies too, right?
At first, Snape. Yes, Snape is an enemy and always a suspect for him for whatever activity that happens in that school.
Right, and then he's also got some allies. And who are they?
Ron and Hermione and a lot of other people in the house and Hagrid.
Right, so this is what makes the story interesting is, you've got these mini sort of narratives within the narrative, right? And, they get resolved and then you move on to another one, and then you kind of have, this is called the inner cave. Number 7, this is when it seems like the hero is going to fail. It really seems that way, even to the hero himself or herself. And for Harry Potter, what is this?
All of a sudden, when I think about it, Harry doesn't know who he is. He has an identity crisis. He believes all his life he believed that he wasn't special or he was just an orphan, and all of a sudden he finds himself in this magic school where he has a legacy. He has a father who is also a Quidditch player, and he's often afraid if he's living up to his father or somebody like that. I guess identity crisis is the main thing, and also he always feels like an orphan. He always is in search of his parents or some kind of an ownership.
Right, so it's interesting because the reader's not sure because even Harry himself is not sure if he's going to win. But then you have like the ordeal or the big showdown. So in Lord of the Rings, quite frankly, this is the part where Frodo actually makes it all the way to the castle where the evil forces are headquartered, and then he destroys the ring. Sorry to spoil that. But so for Harry Potter, I only read the first 2 books, so I actually don't know what the showdown is. Is there something like that in Harry Potter?
I guess the Quidditch win is a big showdown for him at first. Even though he's a first year student, he wins at sports. And no first year student has been a part of a Quidditch team in 100 years or so. So that he makes his own space in the school by doing that. At least for me, that is what comes into my mind. Harry Potter fans can actually answer to that.
Right. So I remember, I think it was in the first book where there's some sort of the inner cave is where they think that they failed something, and then they get extra credit out of nowhere.
Praveen actually says the boy who lived. He already has a name of himself. He actually discovers something about himself, that he is the boy who lived after Voldemort. He was the only person who survived the killing curse.
Yeah.
So that is a showdown in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happens after the showdown?
A reward. Yeah. At least in this particular book, finally when they save the philosopher's stone and everything, they get points. Literally they get like 50 points, 60 points. So is that the reward we are looking for?
Right. It's literally a reward, even quantified in points. Yeah. So then, I mean, I think the last couple are optional. You have the road back for Lord of the Rings. Frodo and his friends literally take the road back to their home in the Shire. But I mean, that's kind of, I think, it depends on story to story.
Yeah, at the end of every Harry Potter book, he has to go back to live with his uncle and aunt. So at least for 2 or 3 months.
Right, I think for Harry, the road back would be escaping from that home and getting to have his own home where he doesn't have to live under those people. But I haven't read that far. Does that happen kind of eventually?
Eventually.
Okay, so that's the road back. And then we have the resurrection, in which the hero's actions are given recognition. Now, does that happen with Harry Potter?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so he gets praise, right? It's not enough just that he did the right thing. He also has everybody, realize it, and they basically they dignify his actions with that recognition, right? And then we finally have, this is kind of redundant, the return to the Shire with the magical item, right? And but that of course varies from one story to the next.
Yeah, but Harry returns to his uncle and aunt with a lot more confidence. He actually is in possession of an invisible cloak and everything. So, and he has a magic wand. He can threaten his cousin with, although his cousin doesn't know that he can't use magic outside of his school, but he can definitely threaten him. So, that could be returning with some magical items.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it can be even sort of metaphorical. Like now he has confidence, but that is kind of a magical item which he didn't have when he was held down and didn't know his identity as a wizard, right? So you could see that, like, we just basically put this to the test. I mean, I wasn't planning on talking about Harry Potter today, but like we were able to go through these 12 stages with Harry Potter, and like some people argue you could do this with any story. And the reason for this is...
Yeah. And Ankit also put another point. In the second book, what happens is he uses a hover charm. Not in the second book, a third book, right? I'm not sure about that. So he uses a hover charm, and Hogwarts immediately detects him. Yeah, second book, Ankit says. So, yeah. So he has a link with the magical world, even though he's outside it.
Right. Harry Potter, yeah, you could probably do this for each book, because to be honest with you, each one of the books is its own self-contained story. So you could go through these 12 stages for each of the, 7, 8 books?
7 books.
Right. Yeah, that would actually be a good thing to do. You'll be studying this in class. So the reason we're able to do this for pretty much any story, right? We could even do this with, say, like the Marvel comics, like Spider-Man and the Avengers and X-Men, right? The reason we could do this is because we have recurring types, but you don't only have recurring types within the story. You also have recurring types within
characters. So what you're saying is that every adventure story, like Harry Potter we read, it's actually the same story we read, like the same structure at least.
Some people have argued that. I'm not necessarily saying that that's my opinion, but there are there are professional novelists who say, yeah, basically the same story. If you really, dig deep under the surface level, you can find this, right?
Yeah. All right. So let me just remind you guys that Ankit, who is very ecstatic about this session, he's only 12 years, guys. You have to give him some applause at this point. All right. So let's move on to the next slide and discuss this.
Okay, so yeah, we're talking about recurring structures of story. What about recurring structures of character? Okay, so now I don't know if this will be as familiar here in India, but in America, everybody knows John Wayne. Do they watch? Is John Wayne kind of a known actor in India at all?
I don't know much about him.
Okay, so this was long ago, like the 1950s. He was
Ankit has heard about him.
yeah, he was a cowboy actor. Okay, so the myth of the cowboy is the hero specifically who doesn't run away from danger when it shows up. He runs to it, right? And you probably have something like that within Indian cinema, for example, like Mohanlal plays some characters like that, right?
Yeah, Mohanlal definitely in some feudal movies and all. And then, Rajnikant, I feel that way. He runs to the danger rather than away from danger. So,
right, so this is a recurring character. Like we call it John Wayne simply in the West, simply because everybody's seen John Wayne, but it's not about him. He's just an example of this general structure, right? So then we also got the hero as the mom and the dad. This is the hero of, say, a single parent who's bringing up a child on a low income, and that is heroic, but it's heroic in a different way, right? Then we got this is hero is, as I can't pronounce his name. Hero is who?
Gandhi.
Right, and he's the unjustly imprisoned rebel. And is he fighting only for his own good?
No, general good.
Right, the good of his whole country, right? That is heroic too. What about the unexpected hero?
Yeah, unexpected heroes. Sometimes, they rise to the occasion. They are the least expected people to be turned into heroes.
Right, the goal to be a hero comes to them. They're not looking for it, but they're still able to thrive despite that fact, right?
Yeah. In relation to Harry Potter, I think Snape turns into a hero towards the end of it all. He was always portrayed as the villain, and unexpectedly he becomes a hero, right? So, yeah.
Right, and that's what makes the story interesting. Like we were talking earlier about, like when you're scanning for structures, you're scanning for the structure of the whole book, and it's like if it's like a hugely unexpected change, like somebody who was considered a villain becomes a hero now, that's a huge change, but that's what keeps it interesting, right? So finally, we have the hero who isn't. For example, you have an alcoholic with an internal struggle. So the journey isn't, literally going from one place somewhere very, very far away to destroy the ring like Frodo. It's rather the struggle is within. They're just trying to become a better person, right?
Okay.
All right, so the reason we're able to do this sort of work, where we recognize these recurring themes, even in stories we weren't expecting to talk about, like Harry Potter, is because of something called archetypes. Now, ma'am, how would you define an archetype?
Archetypes are, in every story, you will see some events or some images or something like that repeating in some stories. For example, I have a lot of examples, but it's your time to speak. So,
right. So archetypes recur over and over again. How many stories of vampires, for example, do we have?
Lots, actually.
Right, maybe like thousands, especially after Twilight came out. If you went to the bookstore in America, there were all these new vampire novels, right? Right, because Twilight made it into a marketing niche now, right?
Yeah. And we even have our native vampires and all, like the Rakshasa, Yekshi, our myths.
Right. So it's like a universal archetype. It's across cultures. It's not simply limited to say the United States or whatever. Okay. And the reason why the vampire is a universal archetype is because of something else that it is related to, which is
Blood.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Right. So blood is a universally meaningful symbol, right? But in contrast, at least according to some theorists, how many stories are there of Frankenstein's monster?
Not much. Yeah, one.
Basically one,
One.
right? Because Frankenstein's monster, according to some, is not a universal archetype in all cultures. It's rather kind of like a modern invention because like it's only in modernity that you can have this idea of a guy, takes some body parts from a grave and then he shocks it with electricity and makes it come alive. That's kind of a modern like science fiction story rather than a timeless, eternal, universal myth. Okay, so some examples of recurring archetypes include you've probably all seen maybe films like from Malayalam or Hindi of like family members fighting over something, like say the family farm, a business, a personal fortune, right?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of Malayalam movies are about, all of a sudden this movie, Manasinakkare, comes to my mind. They are fighting for the family uh, land and all.
Right, and why are they fighting over this?
For power, for,
Right, but also for identity,
for
because
identity.
right, this thing which they're fighting over symbolizes who they are. Right. So then we have another recurring archetype. This one especially within the past like year and a half, which is
Fear of contamination. You're talking about the post-pandemic world.
right. So that one really goes close to home. Like the fear of contamination got to the point where like you can't even leave your house anymore because of this fear, right?
So
So you got another recurring archetype, which is
a huge impersonal thing such as a mountain, an ocean, a giant lizard, or a gorilla. Yeah, you can see in many movies.
right. Recently, we had two of them in one movie.
King Kong and Godzilla.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have two of them in one movie at that point, right? And the essence, the meaning of this thing is that it has to be defeated, right? That's the point of the story. You can't just let King Kong keep destroying New York or whatever. You have to defeat him in the original King Kong movie, right? And finally, we have
A child growing to maturity and encountering difficulty with family relationships along the way.
so the David Class novels, like California Blue, for example. He's in high school and he's struggling to find his identity because he's not like his father. His father was an athlete, a football player. He works at the sawmill now. He's kind of a what they call like a macho man, and like the son's not like that. He's more interested in science, and he doesn't identify with his father. So he has to find out who he is, right?
Yeah.
So I think we'll kind of skip this last one because we're running low on time, and we'll move on to what would you like to discuss because we're running out of time a little bit.
Yeah, let's just discuss this Cinderella. Everyone knows Cinderella.
Okay, what's Cinderella?
Cinderella is about an innocent girl, virtuous, good natured, but wronged. But eventually, her virtue is rewarded.
Right. So why does she win in the end, and her stepmother and stepsisters don't?
Evil versus good.
Right. They lose because they are evil,
Yeah.
and she wins because she is good. Okay. And this is what we want to believe about the world. We want to believe that in the end, good people will win because they're good, right? So what about the story of the eternal triangle?
Yeah, like you have provided a picture here, Twilight. Yeah, so a girl stuck between two boys, or the other way.
Okay, so is it possible for everybody to be happy?
Nope, it's not possible for everybody to be happy. There will be a lot of suffering on the way.
So yeah, what are we watching for? To see
Who gets the girl or the boy? So our interest is piqued about that.
right. So that's what we're interested in. Is like which guy is going to be happy and which one won't, right? What about What about the story of Romeo and Juliet?
Those are between feuding families or two people who cannot be together because of some problem. There will be some problem or the other. This is a story which is repeated over and over in all the cultures and all kinds of movies. All in Hindi, Malayalam, lot of industries you can see movies like this.
So what's a Malayalam film?
Nothing comes to my mind now. You guys can contribute a Malayalam movie that's kind of like Romeo and Juliet.
Okay, so
Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge in Hindi. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. So what about the Holy Grail?
Holy Grail is you are on the quest of something valuable.
So in the story of King Arthur, what is the Holy Grail quite literally?
It's a magical artifact. It is actually a mythological object which promises you eternal life.
Okay, so it's a cup.
It's a cup.
Who held this cup?
Jesus is supposed to have held this cup and drank from it.
Yeah, right. So in the story in the Bible of the Last Supper, Jesus has a cup with some wine, and in the Middle Ages there was a quest to try to find that cup. Okay, specifically, and this object is so valuable that people are literally willing to die trying to get it. Right?
Yeah. So all kinds of modern adventures in search of treasure are inspired by this Holy Grail story, right? Okay.
So what about the Nemesis?
Nemesis, your arch enemy, like Harry and Voldemort.
Yeah, or sometimes your enemy is within. So in the Nemesis, which I don't even know if that's the best word for this, there's a dark secret from the past. So in Shantaram, what's the dark secret of this guy who comes to India from Australia?
He's an escaped criminal.
So when he's making friends within Mumbai and other parts of India, do these people know that he's Australia's most wanted man and a criminal?
No.
Right. So it's a secret, right? But can he run from it forever?
No. So it'll eventually catch up with you, your past.
Right. So then finally we've got
triumph of good over evil. Okay, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. Okay.
Right. So it's actually the norm for multiple of these stories to be combined. So a challenge I would put to the students is maybe think of a Malayalam film or an American film that is multiple of these at the same time.
So yeah, you guys can definitely think about it. So there are basically just 7 stories in the world. So you can think about Malayalam or Hindi or English movies which are a mix of some of these basic stories. And if anything comes to your mind, you can put it in the chat box.
Yeah, so I'll just give you a very quick example. There was a movie from France from like 1982 called The Return of Martin Guerre. It was actually based on a true story. There was a Frenchman in the 1600s named Martin Guerre who went to fight in the religious wars. There was war in France over Protestant Reformation and the old Roman Catholic loyalists to the Pope. And he went to fight in this war. And he disappeared. So everyone assumed he died. And one day this guy comes back to the village and he says he's Martin Guerre, but he's quite different from the guy people remembered. But actually he was a lot better. He was a lot nicer. And his wife liked this guy a lot more because the other one was really not very nice. Well, one day another guy comes back into the village named Martin Guerre. So what stories do we have here?
We have definitely got eternal triangle because the lady is stuck between 2 husbands now.
Yeah.
And Nemesis is there, like a past secret.
So the guy who says he's Martin Guerre, what's his dark secret?
He might not be Martin Guerre.
Right. So his dark secret is that he's an imposter. What's and then we have a dark secret return from the past in the sense that the real Martin Guerre comes back. Okay. So you can't hide from the truth forever is the story here, right?
Yeah.
I think we can probably skip over this slide because this is kind of going over stuff in like maybe more detail, but maybe too much detail. So I think we don't have much time. So what do you think we should talk about out of all this?
How to open a book.
Okay, so this is a very good idea. The first paragraph of a text is so important because the average person who decides to buy a book will do something like the following. So this is actually the bookstore at the airport. I just went to Google Images and just looked up airport bookstore, and I'm like, this looks awfully familiar. You know what airport this is? It's actually Denver. So this is my airport back in America. And I've seen this bookstore many times. So what happens is if you have a long flight, let's just say you're flying from the United States to India, that's like 2 10-hour long flights. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really long time to be on an airplane. So you probably want to take a book. Well, you go to the airport bookstore, and what you'll do is you'll kind of pick up the nearest book with a cool cover,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll look at the back cover to see a little bit about the story, and then you'll open the first page in the first paragraph. This is 30 seconds on average, okay? That's how much time you have to convince somebody to buy your book, okay, rather than another. 30 seconds. So let's think about the greatest openings in history. Anyone read 1984 by George Orwell? Maybe a few? Okay, at the beginning it says the clock strikes 13.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you have my attention because
Clocks never strike 13.
right, that's like there was a movie in the 80s about a heavy metal band that said, "Oh, we have amplifiers that turn up to 11." The joke is, no, amplifiers stop 1 to 10. Like, no, we can go to 11. So now you have my attention because that's out of the ordinary. Okay. So what you should not do is you should not open with a long and boring geographical description of a place, okay? Because it really is not going to matter what that place is if nobody cares enough to stick around to see what happens within it, okay? So in other words, you should not give scenery with no people, okay? You have to have characters from the start, okay? And you have to basically have some sort of problem with those characters. It's not enough if like, oh, there's people who are just living happily. No, there's got to be a problem, okay? So I'll let Minu ma'am take over from here.
No. You can explain just how they can get over distractions too.
Okay, so distractions are something which are actually far more time consuming than it might seem because psychological studies have confirmed that if you check social media like say Twitter or Instagram, it's not just the minute or whatever you spend seeing if anyone liked your post. It's an average of 30 minutes to recover your attention fully after you've been distracted by social media. This is why some people actually recommend, if you're a writer, for example, to have a laptop that can't connect to the internet. And this is what I do myself, actually. My laptop can't connect to internet, and I basically have to have that sort of working conditions in order to be able to really focus for a long period of time on, say, writing a book or something like that. So this is something which is so much more difficult, I think, in the era of smartphones when you've always got this phone on you. But it's still something which I think you should try to find some way to have a distraction-free environment to work in. So I'll hand things over now to ma'am because, okay, so the last slide is we have some book recommendations, okay? So we'll just close with this. I recommend reading an author named David Klass because his characters are believable precisely because the conflicts he describes are a lot like those in real life. There's no easy or obvious solution. For example, in the novel California Blue, I was mentioning the boy has a conflicted relationship with his father because they're not like each other at all. Oh, but then he finds out his father has only 6 months to live because he has cancer. Then he finds out that there's a butterfly that is an endangered species never discovered before in the same forest where his father makes a living chopping down trees for logging. So he could report the existence of the butterfly, in which case his father will lose his job because it'll be illegal to destroy the habitat of endangered species. So he could save the butterfly, or he could save his father's job who, quite frankly, is not going to live much longer. It's a very complicated situation. And never mind the fact that the butterfly will go extinct forever if the logging is allowed to continue. So it's a very complicated. There's no easy or obvious solution to this. It's a lot like real life. I don't like personally reading Ayn Rand because the characters are not like those in real life. They're fairly one-dimensional. They're basically personifications of ideals rather than real people, and the conflicts between these characters are very predictable and artificial. It's like obviously the guy who's literally she calls like a Superman. He's like above any other man. Is going to be winning over the people who are so far below him, and it's so obvious that that's the case that it's not even basically any point in reading the book. My own opinion. Sorry, anyone who enjoys that. I also like reading Dostoevsky and Frank Herbert because you have a lot of philosophical interest in a novel like Dune about life on an extreme desert planet where water is so rare that you're not even basically allowed to shed tears. You're not even allowed to cry because that's wasting water, right? That's really interesting. Whereas there was another novel about water shortage called The Doors You Mark Are Your Own, which was totally unbelievable because it's supposed to be extremely short on water, and yet the guy is just constantly getting drunk. The guy doesn't even have a job. He's just drinking beer all the time. Well, how on earth is that possible when it takes 155 liters of water to produce 1 liter of beer? It makes no sense, right?
It doesn't.
Right. So a story that's just unbelievable like that is not going to hold your attention. You have to have a story that's actually, almost like more believable than real life.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why I have these recommendations. Some other good books are Gone with the Wind. Balzac's Human Comedy is like 90 books as a kind of a picture of life in France in the 19th century. Very fascinating. Of course, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So I'd like to close by thanking everybody for this wonderful opportunity to discuss a very fascinating subject. I hope that this information will be helpful, and I will hand things over to Minu ma'am now.
So thank you so much for that good session. We did have a lot of people join us at one point, but we are now down to 30. So thank you so much for being with us. Do you have any questions to pose to sir? Any questions? You can post it. Okay. Ankit says he doesn't have any questions. So that went a little, over the allotted time. We still have 2 minutes. So that is to ask any questions regarding, how to maintain consistency in reading. Okay. Can you answer that?
So removing distractions is, of course, like the most important thing, I think. But also to keep the consistency, I would recommend using a pacer. So if you would hand me a book, please, any book, and hand me a pen, please. Okay, so when I first started reading, I would sometimes get stuck. Not necessarily on a word I didn't know, just I would forget where I was on the page. So I started using a pen and actually just trace now. This is not recommended in the long term because you'd be better to do the vertical reading, but you kind of just want to maintain consistency, finish the book without getting stuck anywhere. I would recommend kind of using pen to do that, and really just read something that's exciting. That's the biggest thing is like make reading enjoyable rather than something that's done just out of obligation. Read the greatest writers like Balzac and Herman Melville and Victor Hugo and David Class.
I definitely say that using a pencil or a pen as a tracer or pacer would slow you down if you are a fast reader. So personally, I don't like doing that. But one thing is you can always choose your reading material with a lot of concern about it, because something he enjoys, it wouldn't be enjoyable by me. For example, David Class. I found David Class really nice at first, but some books I really did not enjoy. But it's definitely good for a beginner to read, especially someone who's like 12 years old definitely can enjoy. Not just him. Yeah, Ankit is a fast reader, so yeah. A Of course, Ankit, you can pick up David class. I think you'll find it enjoyable. Not just you, everyone who's on the call, you can definitely pick up David class. It's really enjoyable. Okay, and always read something that appeals to you. If you don't like, if you read through and you don't find it interesting, just put it down. Just like Ankit put down Lord of the Rings. You're not alone. I'm with you. I didn't find Lord of the Rings that inspiring either. So, any other questions? Please prefer some horror story books.
I haven't read many horror books or seen many horror films. Would you maybe have any suggestions?
I'm not a fan of horror. So, but we'll research and get back to you. So, anybody else can suggest any horror stories? I think thrillers. I've heard Stephen King is really good. So,
Actually, grab a mystery book.
okay,
It's very nearby, but it's slightly out of range at the moment.
Suspense mystery novels. There are many actually. Goosebumps. Yeah, Goosebumps is really good. Yeah.
And the best mystery, or this is called the crime stories by Louis L'Amour. So Louis L'Amour is kind of more known for cowboy stories, but he also had some very good sort of mystery stories collected in these, which can be obtained for quite cheap. There's about 300 rupees or something like that. Easy to find here in India, even. So I definitely would recommend this collection. This is like volume 6 of Louis L'Amour's short stories.
Yeah, and if you are a beginner in reading and if you want to read some mystery novels, I'd always suggest, like Ankit said, Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys, Famous Five, Secret Seven. Enid Blyton is a really good mystery writer if you are a beginner. But if you're an intermediate reader, I don't think it will appeal to you that much. You'll have to look up, Sherlock Holmes or somebody else you like. Arthur Conan Doyle is a really good writer for mystery, and if you are into murder mysteries and all, you'll definitely find somebody along that lines. We'll definitely get back to you all with these suggestions. Agatha Christie, right?
Sure.
Yeah, Agatha Christie is Stephen King is very complicated. At your age, Ankit is definitely complicated. Okay. Maybe try after 3 years. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Ankit is a very stubborn reader. Looks like it.
Ma'am,
Ashwin.
ma'am, parts of books. It's interesting. How is it?
Which book, Ashwin?
Any books like not English, Malayalam also.
Malayalam, I'll definitely suggest you some easy books to read. Okay. Let me just think about it and get back to you. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hey, there is our kid Ankit. Hi, Ankit. Okay. So yeah, Ankit is a very good reader, voracious reader. I'm really impressed by him. So I really wanted to introduce him to the class. Anyway, I guess that's about it. I don't think there are any other questions to answer. Hi, Ashwin. Ashwin's also here. Let me pin him. Hi, Ashwin.
Hello. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good. We both are good, Ashwin. Thank you so much. How are you?
I'm fine.
All right. So still very naughty. You are right. Okay. Anyway, I guess we can get off this call. We can come to an end of this meeting. We have been going on for more than 1 hour, and I definitely say that it was a fruitful session. I hope you guys also enjoyed, at least the ones who remained